All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar session this afternoon where we're going to be focusing on developing competitive proposals to U.S. federal agencies. Just as a quick introduction, we are from Hanover Research, a grants consulting firm that has been working with American University through the Office of Research for about a year now. This is our third webinar session that we provided to AU faculty over the past few months. The first one that we did was focusing on grants prospecting, so identifying funding opportunities for your research. And the second one we did was focusing on concept development, so developing your project idea and making sure that it's competitive for potential grant funders. So if you didn't join those sessions and are interested in those topics, I'd encourage you to reach out to Jennifer Mayer. She has both the slides and the recordings of those sessions that we've done over the past couple months. But for this afternoon, I'm happy to introduce my colleague, Tom Kuhn. Tom is a senior grants consultant on our team at Hanover, and he's going to be delivering the session today.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Happy Wednesday to everyone. It looks like it's sunny on almost every window, at least that I can see on the screen, and glad to spend some time with you. As Chris mentioned, this is the third in our sequence, developing competitive proposals to the U.S. federal agencies. So I'm going to build a little bit on what you've done, but also assume that you really understand let me fast forward to this life cycle, on the grant life cycle, where we are in terms of you developing your ideas, doing the prospecting, building that concept, which is really a critical component, both for you collaborating with your colleagues, et cetera, but also beginning the process and really selling the concept to the funders. And I'm going to spend a bit of time talking with you today about really what it takes to align with the federal priorities, how to craft competitive proposal elements to really speak to those and give you a lot of the logic behind what you're doing, and then some tips on maximizing your impacts with reviewers. Too often we're writing proposals to ourselves and our colleagues and others, not always fully focused on communicating the impacts to the reviewers, who can be a mix, right, of both subject matter experts and generalists. But I jumped around a little bit. Just briefly, I'm Tom Kuhn. As Chris said, I've been with Hanover almost 10 years now. I've been doing this work forever, and I really specialize in federal proposals, a lot of work at the bench science, but also a lot of work focused on the application of that science and through tech transfer and commercialization, et cetera. So I've done lots of proposals to get to that win number. The webinar today is really set up to be fairly quick, about 40 minutes with some time for Q&A, but with the group that's here, and certainly as always, please feel free to ask questions as we go. You can do those in the Q&A function in the Zoom toolbar, or which my colleagues will be monitoring, or just feel free to go off mute and speak up. But we'll walk through this pretty straightforward agenda and then have some time for some proper Q&A. I'm taking a step upwards a bit here and not really focusing with you on the mechanics of the actual proposal, right? We all know that you've got to be compliant and you've got to be competitive, right? You've got to answer the mail, give the reviewers what they want and what they're looking for in the order that's there, and make sure that you really tap into the ways in which this project is innovative, lines up with the agencies, and really has opportunity to make a difference in the field vis-a-vis the merit criteria that the funder is giving us. So this is kind of a prelude here, and let's get into the actual topic. Again, feel free to stop me, ask any questions anytime as we go. So aligning with federal priorities, this is critical, right? We know that proposals that are aligned with agency goals really are the way to be competitive. There's not a lot you can do, fundamental theoretically, that's not associated with how the funder is trying to make these awards, what they're trying to get out of this. So, and increasingly the federal agencies are funding projects that both demonstrate measurable impacts in the advancement of their missions, but also within the broader social context. So we're seeing a lot of expectation that funders are, yes, advancing their mission, working on core science, making core discoveries, but that's being done more and more within the context of how these public dollars are being spent and the expectations for the kinds of impacts. So it's really critical that you're analyzing agency strategic plans and looking at the portfolio of funded work that they have, the NSF, NIH, and they all make them available online. It's a little harder to get DoD and DARPA stuff. But the idea is really to understand what the agency is trying to do, what its specific directorate that you're approaching is trying to accomplish, and then what specifically in the funding mechanism are they trying to get at? So because you really need to know and understand that context so that you can reference and bring the specific agency language narrative into your narrative, right? So if they're focusing on climate resilience, those are the kinds of things that we need to talk about. And you want to clearly show how your project then contributes to those mission objectives and within the larger context of the social spending. So this, like a good movie, right? Really beginning with how the program is really aligned with the federal priorities. It's absolutely critical. And in this example that I give, here for NSF, talking about how a project aligns with specific climate resilience and sustainable infrastructure issues, as well as heat mitigation, and how that then supports NSF's mission to drive the innovative research in the material science and achieve the levels of sustainability and societal well-being. These are critical components for you, both as you consider your project and begin to describe it and lay it, articulate and lay it out so that this alignment is core into what you're trying to communicate in the proposal. It's also critically important to really look at the funding trends. I kind of hinted at this idea that the federal government, most of its agencies are really moving uh, in a direction that encompasses not only their mission, but this broader aspect of, why these public dollars are flowing in the first place. So it's important to address the emerging trends and really demonstrate how your project thinks forward about the ways in which you can advance your field and advance application of that work to meet and exceed kind of agency priorities. Note that these are evolving. We're obviously seeing the hyper evolution of some focus within the federal agencies. Stay tuned, right? But it's important that you're monitoring these shifts and these priorities. We've seen more executive orders in the last week than we've ever seen, but there are a lot of stable documents showing where the Congress is trying to spend dollars through the budget requests and how specifically the agency is appealing to Congress during the appropriations process. So it's important that you're really looking at this and how it translates into examples. For instance, DoD has often been focused principally on its mission, but increasingly it's really looking at how the work that it's sponsoring and the ways that it's adapting that work into its mission can not only help to modernize the military, right, advance Army, Air Force, Navy goals, but how it contributes, how that technology, how those service innovations, others can contribute to private and public sector growth. For NSF, it's the same kind of thing. They're really pushing on this idea that the translation of science into practice is critically important. So as you do deep work in AI and cybersecurity systems, it's going to be important that you're showing how that work, really stimulates new and emerging technologies and the potential application of those technologies to broader issues in society. In other words, we don't study cybersecurity, right? In theory, we study cybersecurity to figure out ways to make us more secure. And with NIH, it's a pretty standard that they're always interested in this idea of overall impact. That is, the extent to which the work you're doing can really translate into health sciences knowledge, what NSF would call the intellectual merit, right? The idea that you're changing, closing gaps, improving what we know, adding to knowledge, and then translating that into how you're addressing specific healthcare challenges through clinical innovations, process optimization, et cetera. So really making sure that you're incorporating these trends and showing the reviewers how the work fits into those broader trends is going to be critical. And then as you dig deeper, really understanding how the proposal fits to an agency's funding priorities will also enhance your competitiveness. And this is where you start to look and really start to focus in on the agency itself, research its funding mechanisms, and its parent guidance, and look for the specific ways that it's trying to advance your work. Oftentimes, these are articulated as merit review criteria in the specific solicitations. Sometimes they're in the parent notice or even in the agency guidelines. But the critical step here is really to match the project goals to these evaluation criteria. I know you've all done grant and you've all seen this, but this is a really key insight into making sure that at the core of your project design, you're orienting to the ways in which the project design will produce results that you can substantiate both in terms of, broadly the intellectual merit, the ways in which you're advancing the field, closing gaps, contributing to new knowledge, validating new methodologies, et cetera. And then what NSF calls the broader impacts, which is the broader contributions to the array of stakeholders. Oftentimes, right, this is the kinds of students you're targeting, your institution. If you were to draw concentric circles out, the different ways that stakeholders will benefit. So for NSF, that they're always focusing on demonstrating impact through the intellectual merit and broader impacts. In fact, those two review criteria are applicable to all NSF grants, and then the specific solicitation oftentimes will include additional criteria. For NIH, it's something similar. They're always scoring proposals based on the overall impact, right? That's the master score you get, which is kind of a roll up of their other criteria. But they're always looking for you to highlight the ways in which the project is innovative and then has clinical significance. And that combination really helps to convey the overall impacts. And with USDA and other agencies and NASA, they're really looking for opportunities for you to show the way in which you're improving on what we know and how what we know applies to what we want to do. And another critical step, and this is, sometimes required, DoD, all the agencies, DARPA, even NSF in some areas like SBIR, you have to do pitches now. But it's not always required, but we always recommend engaging with program officers. These are colleagues of yours with terminal degrees and subject matter experts generally, and they are there. They build the RFPs. They build and manage the review panels. They participate in the review panels for the proposals that are moved up to panel conversation. They're there in the room. They're helping synthesize the ways in which the reviewers are identifying strengths and weaknesses and the overall interpretation of the project's value. And they participate in actively developing a lot of times the panel summary that you see, which is a kind of a roll up and a consolidation of the different ways and a normalization of the different ways that the reviewers are talking about your proposal. So it's important when engaging with program officers. I know you've talked a bit about developing the concept. This is the key asset really for you to connect with program officers. It's important that you develop that concept paper, highlighting the objectives, the outcomes, and the ways and the impacts and the ways in which it fits with the agency. Critically, it's important to review and revise these with your colleagues before sharing with the program officer. Obviously, you want other subject matter experts hitting you on potential weaknesses or points of where you could use more clarity, etc. And then once you revise with them, you tend to have your best draft version, which is really all you need to communicate with the program officer. And we recommend, as you've heard in the previous webinar, developing that concept, emailing it to the program officer, and asking for consultations. And the point really is to provide some time first to get a good sense of alignment, right? You want the program officer to let you know that there's a fit. They can see the fit. They can see the ways in which you're proposing to advance on the intellectual merit and perhaps the broader impacts already. That could be beneficial. And based on that, oftentimes can give you some good feedback on the appropriateness of submitting a proposal. If not, they oftentimes know where else the project might be funded, certainly in their directorate or their agency, but they have a strong network of various program officers, all of whom are looking for the kinds of work that stimulates their portfolio. So getting connected with these program officers, gaining alignment, feedback from them, and then having conversations with them about their enthusiasm, about the challenges for proposing to their panels or reviewers, the ways in which your project really builds on, or perhaps only incrementally builds on some of the other stuff that the program officer is funding in their portfolio. So these are excellent opportunities to not only gain these kinds of insights regarding alignment and potential competitiveness, but in so doing, really to establish some rapport with these program officers, show them that you're productive, you're thoughtful. Sometimes program officers can give you advice that requires you to go back a bit and redevelop some aspects, so then come back to them. And as long as they can really see that you're, not asking basic questions, but really working fundamentally to align your project with what they're trying to do in their portfolio and really showing the ways in which the project is well positioned to add significant merits, is something that oftentimes impresses them and helps you to begin to develop a relationship. These program officers, stay, some are on loan, some are permanent, but they tend to stay in their positions for a while and have, extraordinary institutional knowledge and guidance that they can give you to really help you better align and better sell your proposal to their reviewers. So that's the first section. Those are kind of high level aspects, which I know you all think of, but I wanted to give you some specific tips on really what it takes to do that alignment. Before we get into the bulk of the presentation here is crafting the proposal elements. And again, I'm not going to go too deep into the specific elements of an actual proposal. You guys are smart writers, you know how to do this, you've seen this. So I'm going to give you kind of a high level on what are some of the critical components of the application. And of course, the project summary, most often the most read component of your proposal, both because it's an introduction to the larger proposal that a lot of reviewers use to get context and understand what they're about to read, but also can gain some insights that help them to triage the proposal in terms of where they initially think it may fall based on the way it's written, based on the ideas that are inside of it, and the way in which you show the logic of what, how, and the results. So, a compelling summary really describes and sells the project in a concise, impactful way. This is your elevator pitch. You want to make the reviewers ask, hey, why didn't I think of this, right? These are other subject matter experts or generalists who understand applicability of your work. And oftentimes, I've heard this several times in panels, that people, the projects that just score perfectly are the ones where people are saying, yeah, that's really going to work. You've got some level of ability to convince them and show them. So in the project summary, you want this proposal to make this strong first impression. And we recommend here as the action items to focus early in the project summary, the first few sentences, right? Certainly the first paragraph. You want to describe what you're going to do, the problem, the innovation, and the potential impact, and then move into how you will do the work and the expected results. And these results should be tied to the review criteria. So you're really taking some time here to sell the proposal, to sell yourself, and to really sell the value of the project to the funder. It's important, notably, to use plain language and be succinct here. First, that you don't have enough space, and it's important that the reviewers quickly understand what and how you are doing it, but also remember that there's two types in general, two types of reviewers: those who have subject matter expertise in your field, and those like people like Hanover that understand a lot more but are generalists. We don't have the ability to follow your equations or to deal with the deep technical language. So make sure that you're writing to both of those types of reviewers, and always conclude with the social benefits, right? This goes back to your understanding about what the agency is trying to accomplish in its broader context. So you're able to show in this project summary all the components of the project in a clear and succinct way, written for the types of reviewers that are on panel, and then tie that back to the social benefits. And I give an example here at the end, and I try to carry this example through for the same project from here forward. In this case, a project that's looking to enhance urban heat resilience by developing specific materials with low thermal conductivity, et cetera, designed to achieve very specific goals. In this case, I think, sorry, there's something in my way, to reduce temperatures by 10%. And so this kind of clarity in the abstract can really help you do a lot to communicate the value of the project and pique reviewers' interest so that they go into your proposal pretty excited to see the details as you unpack what and how you're going to do this work. Critically, it's always important, like with any good movie, any good book, to really frame, establish the context. In the case of grants, it's almost always a need. There's something we don't know. There's something we need to get done. There's something we're trying to overcome. So you want to present a clear, often data-driven problem statement that establishes the importance of your project within the context of the broader problem and social issues that the science, that the thinkers, and that the other stakeholders are trying to do. So in framing the need, it's important here to be a bit more detailed. Reviewers tend to like evidence, right? You don't want to say things like many, frequently. You want to say, 48, biweekly. There's lots of opportunities for you as you establish the problem and frame the need to leverage some quantitative and qualitative evidence to help you define the program. And that helps you really really begin to start speaking as a scientist, as a researcher, and even as a program director in terms of what you're trying to do, and then move right into the gaps, right? What don't we know? What isn't happening? What are the strengths and weaknesses of what others have tried to do? Remember, the funders are often looking at a portfolio, so they have a really good sense beyond the literature, what's actually happening in the field. And this is why it's important for you, as we mentioned earlier, to go back and look at the agencies, not only their mission and their direction, but their portfolio of funded programs so that you can see and identify where and how your project can really work on some of these gaps, close these gaps, address them, in the case of transformative work, really move beyond certain concerns that perhaps were holding the field back. And then importantly, to ground the project in the, to establish the rationale, to ground it both in what you know that's happened in the literature, where the field is broadly, and of course your preliminary results, yours, your colleagues, et cetera. You want to be able to show how specifically that work contributes to helping you establish and strengthen the rationale for the proposal your project you're proposing. So I've got an example here of need, really giving a sense both in terms of the science and also the broader the social needs. And as you continue to drill down, you can almost see this like an hourglass, right? Starting with the context, moving through what you know in the background, the literature, your specific questions and the specific work you've done that shows part of the rationale. So here you're drilling down further into the specific questions that motivate the study and that help to generate the hypothesis and the direction for achieving specific objectives. So clear questions and objectives really help to provide a roadmap for the proposal. This is where we say you start to organize your project. When you bring the reviewers down through the context and the preliminaries, you want to give them the core question, right? This question can be both technical and or non-technical to help both reviewers understand the way in which the project shows promise for advancing your field and to achieving these broader impacts. And then you want to help show how the question then works, helps you derive your hypothesis. What is it, the question, the rationale, et cetera, how is it interlinked and how does it help you to drive a specific hypothesis that you can then link to the question and the specific goals and objectives that you're going to propose. So in this example below, we can see I talk about, what material properties optimize thermal reflection in dense urban areas. So then in between that is some, already you've explained kind of where you are in the field and where you are in your own work. And here you can generate a specific hypothesis. Most research for most funders is hypothesis driven. Doesn't always have to be. That's a more complex topic. But in this case, you can see that you have a question, then your hypothesis helps to drive the specific ways in which you will begin to answer that question. And through doing that work, which you propose next, right? The goals, the objectives, the tasks and activities will help you achieve this objective of improving urban heat resilience. So then the next step really becomes, in the proposal, there's a lot of work from what we just talked about to get to the outcomes, right? But in most cases, and for NIH, this is always the second component of your proposal. They want to see the innovation. They want to see that you're taking a novel approach. You're using new methodologies, new data, new applications, new theories, and or proven types or versions of those to really to drive a level of inquiry and a level of work that is that's innovative. So in comparison to other to existing solutions and other approaches, you want to be able to show them the ways in which your program is taking a lead or a new step or leveraging some new capabilities. And then to quantify the impacts of those innovations. It's not enough just to describe them. You want to show the correlation between their implementation and the effective, the achievement of results. So, and ultimately, and more broadly, how your work addressing those key gaps in knowledge or technology can really help you advance their understanding, the field's understanding, and the applicability of your work. So in this example, the idea is that the research will advance urban heat resilience by generating next generation reflective materials, et cetera, and then that specific goal of getting back to the 10%. And this last statement about surpassing conventional cooling technologies and efficiency and scalability really starts to show some comparative effectiveness of your proposed study versus what's already being done or is available to others. And as you drill down further, the reviewers are almost always going to be interested in your methodology. So it's important to provide detailed methods because not only do these help give the reviewers better understanding of what you're doing and the feasibility of the project, but as well a correlation between the work you're proposing and your ability to do that work. So the idea here is really communicating both the credibility of you and your team and your capabilities in this field, as well as the feasibility of achieving the proposed results. So it's important to provide a clear step-by-step methodology so reviewers are not confused. They can really understand at a broader level the application of this methodology within the context of your proposal. And this oftentimes involves highlighting work, preliminary work that you've done or that your colleagues have done or that you're picking out from the literature that supports the proposed methods. And oftentimes this can be found in the portfolio of work that the agency is funding. So again, another reason to really understand that portfolio because there is a gap between publications and the work you're proposing, and the program officers and a lot of the reviewers tend to know that work that's happening. So grounding yourself in that and really highlighting the way in which you're extending on that work can be very important. And NIH introduces this idea of rigor and reproducibility. Here I'm just using feasibility, but the idea is that you can't stand up a straw man, right? When you're describing the work that's been done or the work that's actively ongoing, you really want to be able to set up the most rigorous articulation of the strengths and weaknesses of prior research and the specific ways that your project will address those strengths and weaknesses. And then it's important to include timelines, resource allocations, and build in risks and contingency plans as you describe the methodology, because the reviewers need to know like when and how and the sequence of events that are happening. They're also become interested in the resources that are needed to achieve those goals. They start to look a little bit at the team composition, the kinds of facilities and computers and data points and other things that you have. And then importantly, it's not enough just to tell them what you're going to do and then describe the outcomes. There's got to be some conversation of the potential risks, what could go wrong, and how, and the contingencies, how you'll adapt and still achieve significant merits. This is an important and often overlooked component of proposals. We know it's a critical aspect of science, right, to show your theory of error. So the extent to which you can show the reviewers that you're thinking at another level. Okay, here's my project. But this in activity 2, objective 4, this could go wrong, and not simple things like equipment could break or the time doesn't exist, but the methodology somehow doesn't work out and you get unexpected results. So how then do you show the reviewers that you're thinking at another level? A, so that they understand that you are thinking at that level and gaining more control over the project. But B, if you don't provide those details, the risk is that they may have concerns that you're not addressing, which they will default in most cases start to convert into weaknesses in the proposal. So including a lot of detail about when, how, and what will happen if we don't get expected results can be are critical in the proposal, and really making sure that the full explanation of your methodology includes the ways in which you'll adapt the project if that methodology doesn't prove as effective as you thought. And you can see these are scientists, these are researchers and program directors. They really understand the extent to which there are risks in these programs. NSF often talks about high risk projects, right? They want to do things that have a lot of elements of risks, and so they're encouraging that for you to take on that kinds of work. So it's critically important that you show them that you're managing the risks. And as you do all of this, provide this level of detail, as you lay this rationale in this way, you can get to your expected outcomes and clearly define these outcomes and how they'll really help to contribute to the value and relevance of the project. These outcomes should be quantified and qualified to the extent possible. You don't want to just state the outcomes. It's important to show the specifics of them and how they correlate to the proposed work. It should be very clear that these outcomes are direct correlates to the specific activities you're proposing, and you want to make explicit then how the outcomes will help you to advance on the merit criteria and the agency priorities that you've been researching as you develop your project. And then, of course, tying the deliverables back to the broader social, academic, or the technology challenges that we're trying to overcome. So in this example, the project is expected to yield, advanced materials that have capability of reducing temperatures by 10%, and how they'll be validated. right? And then additional outcomes involved that speak to the both the intellectual merit and the broader impact aspects. These expected outcomes are critical. Again, there's something that, is at the core of the logic of your project summary. And again, as you unpack in this much longer document, it's kind of the same skeleton. So you're getting to the same kinds of outcomes. So going back to the hourglass, where we start with context and move through the background into the specifics of what we'll do, and then the granularity as the grains fall through the middle of the hourglass. That's where the subject matter experts are looking at your project design and all the components and then you kind of come out of that to start to talk about here's the ways in which we'll manage the project, here's the timing, here's all the details, and then you're at the bottom, leaving a firm foundation for the outcomes, right? The ways in which the project will not only produce outcomes that are directly relevant to the subject matter experts in the science and the science itself, but then the applicability of that science to solving these broader problems. And that's really what NSF means when you submit to them by speaking to the intellectual merit and the broader impacts, or other agencies mean. You'll see that their review criteria are often structured in a way that mirrors this idea that, in order to solve broad, complex problems, you've got to drill down into the specifics and then show them how those specifics make a difference in those broader problems and the understanding, etc. So the overall broader impacts, this idea of societal relevance really comes into play with NSF and NIH. There's some aspect to which it comes into play at the DoD and other agencies where they're looking for, multi benefits of the projects that they're funding, but those aren't always required. But the overall broader impacts really relate to NSF, NIH, and the ways in which your project contributes more broadly to achieving societal goals. So that these are the public dollars that are funding your project, so the public benefit should be very clear. So identify and engage merited groups that will benefit from the project. It's important to really show, in that concentric circle model, how this program will invigorate the work that you and your colleagues are doing in your portfolio and the future of your research. And then to show the benefits where there's student involvement, how that student involvement really impacts their learning, but also their propensity to be more successful, to see themselves and be more successful as scientists. And then, how this improves the department and thus your school, perhaps even your university, and in collaboration with other groups, with other universities, even community organizations, other stakeholders, the ways in which this project is having a big difference. In the NIH world, it kind of tracks from the work you're doing at the intellectual merit level into the clinical applicability and the ways in which you can either change healthcare protocol and delivery and make a difference in the clinical outcomes. And it's important to create measurable outreach or other education initiatives that show that your project is focused on, broad understanding and awareness of what's needed and the challenges associated with really engaging people to participate in, learn, and gain skills. For NSF, there's often this idea of broader dissemination, right? They don't want to see their research only published in the academic journals and presented at conferences, which they expect as part of your normal duties. They really want to see instead how the applicability of the work, I shouldn't say instead, they also want to see the applicability of your work in that broader context. So for this example here, one of the ways to describe the impacts is how, the project will enhance urban heat resilience, reduce energy demand, and mitigate health risks by developing effective reflective materials, supporting sustainable infrastructure, lowering emissions, and informing climate adaptive policies. These are examples of the overall broader impacts for NIH. There's always a section which we recommend including closer to the end. So it acts as a powerful summary, kind of that broad grounding of your hourglass. And it's an opportunity in all proposals to really leave off with strong articulation of the impacts, assuming that you've shown all the logical relations and the correlation between the project and the outcomes. It should be very straightforward for you to articulate the ways in which those impacts are directly relevant to the funder and more broadly. Another important component of competitive proposals, often overlooked, often rushed near the end of a project, and often really done in collaboration with a different set of the group, right? Your Office of Sponsored Research is oftentimes helping you with the budget and the budget justification. But I recommend that you really start to think of this early because the budget is really the other side of the helix, of the DNA helix, right? The reviewers aren't going to criticize your budget too much, but they are clearly looking for, are the right people on there? Are the right costs in there? Are there enough resources, physical, financial, personnel? Are there enough resources in there? And so as you think, even at the concept stage, or certainly as you're developing your project for the proposal, for the project description, begin to work on the budget, right? Think about the kinds of line items and the dollars that it will take to achieve the individual and the collective goals and objectives of your proposal. Because providing that information in a transparent and justified way really helps reinforce the project's feasibility and pass the reviewer's sniff test for what they call cost reasonableness. At the end of most reviews, the program officer or the panel chair will just ask us, take a look at the budget. Is it reasonable? Are there any recommendations you want to make to the agency before as we take this to the next level and especially on a really well-scored proposal that's probably going to get funded. So my example here is a simple way of justifying one line, in this case for the infrared thermographic cameras, that's essential for this project. If it's a big amount, like $40,000, it goes in the equipment line, and it probably needs some further justification. This actually may be something I would clear with the program officer early, because it is an expensive item. But the idea here is that you're really talking about you're justifying the expense here for this line item and really talking about the importance directly relative to your project. So the more you do this early, when I used to write grants all the time at universities, I would help faculty just develop a budget spreadsheet and start building that budget, and then add a line and a column for the justification why you need this. Because if you come with that draft to your sponsored research office, they're oftentimes able to really help you develop the budget and justification with less work, but also they can begin to point out issues. Hey, this is too expensive. This has got to be treated this way by our policies, and other things that are really important to making sure that you have a clear and compelling budget. And then last, I think here is the supporting documents. These are often done hastily too. And it's critically important, especially the bio sketch and the letters of support. It's critically important that these are really polished for the proposal. And in the same way that you might tool a resume to a specific employer. I've done grants my whole life, but when I wanted to work for Hanover, I needed to tell them how my bio sketch really helps me not only know how to write grants, but consult, think strategically, work collaboratively. So there's important ways for you to develop the bio sketch so that you're really emphasizing not only your individual capabilities, especially if you've been a PI or co-PI, because that speaks to your ability to do the science as well as to be effective in a grant project. So make sure those bio sketches are up to date. Don't do them last. Get people to do them early so you can really think about them as an important part of the proposal package. And of course, the requisite letters of support. Some agencies are drilling these down to, perfunctory language like NSF. The burden is really to describe the ways the partners will work in the project description, and then to make sure that the right letter is included. Because as a reviewer, I have to say, when people make statements about how things will work, that means a lot, but we oftentimes look to make sure that the collaborators that you're identifying have formally signed on to the project. And this can be incredible, both in terms of the combination of the powerful bio sketches that come with this level of collaboration, and in general, the levels of collaboration, the different types of expertise that are really needed to handle increasingly complex projects, and to make sure that the core science is really having those broader impacts. So that's the core of the presentation. I don't see any questions yet, so I'm going to move to the last couple slides about maximizing its review. It should say almost reviewer impact. But the idea here is that it's not enough to write these proposals to satisfy, traditional publication requirements, because you're not speaking to the kinds of people that pick up the journals and go through the science with, more of a subject matter expertise bend. In this case, we're really talking about writing for a diverse group of reviewers. And as I mentioned earlier, this balance of subject matter experts and generalists. So it's important that you're always balancing the technical precision and language that's accessible to both groups. And I have the example down below in parentheses, which you wouldn't include in the proposal. But the idea is that you're oftentimes talking specifically about the technology for the specialists, and then you're talking about the relevance of that work to the generalists. In this case, how the reflective material technology improves heat resilience by doing certain specific things that the experts really understand. This may not be the best example. I think in general, there are lots of times when you're at, you're in the equation or you're speaking about the ways in which the methodology has specific technical aspects, etc. The idea really is not necessarily to create one or two key sentences that help bring the generalists up to speed, but as you describe everything, to use a blend of technical and plainer vernacular language throughout the proposal, so that as you get too technical, you make sure that the generalists can follow that work by providing those broader, more accessible statements. And it's also important as you develop the proposal here to think about the ways in which you own the transition, certainly between paragraphs, but also between sections. You don't want to lose the non-technical reviewers at any point. They'll really understand the project summary, they'll understand the context, the background. But when you drive into the specific objectives, methodologies, activities, contingency plans, you want to make sure that you're just making it clear to them. And one of the ways we know how to do that, both for subject matter experts and for the more generalists, is to use clear and compelling visuals. So the extent to which you can describe something that you're doing in a combination of technical and vernacular language, and then show that in a way that sometimes is only relevant to the subject matter expert. They need to see, certain equations, certain correlations, whatever. But the extent to which you provide a powerful visual can oftentimes help not only the generalists and specialists understand it, but those who learn more visually, those who may not follow the text as much. Maybe they're skimming, maybe they're looking for the key points. But stopping the reviewers and really illustrating those key points can be effective for all the different types of readers. And then, of course, it's important to anticipate and address their concerns. I already talked a bit about the importance of describing, major challenges for unexpected, what happens when you get unexpected results and the contingencies that you'll take. So that is a critical aspect, really anticipating what the reviewer concerns may be, the same way you might have concerns on another person's project, the same way your collaborators may have concerns about your project. It's important to anticipate those and to demonstrate that you're prepared to deal with them effectively. So oftentimes we see faculty really leveraging pilot data to address feasibility as they establish the rationale for the project and as they showcase their capabilities. So that's always an important aspect to really make sure the reviewers have confidence in your ability to handle the technical and the unexpected. And then include the contingency plans for these risks, as I talked about. And the same point, really showing reviewers that you're thinking about the project at another level, that you're aware that there are challenges. They could be challenges related to your team, challenges related to technology and instrumentation, et cetera. Or they could just be unexpected results. You're doing science, right? We don't always get the results we expect. And so this helps to not only show them you're at the next level of doing this work, but that you have the wherewithal and the plans to address any weaknesses as you go along. So the examples here are fairly straightforward. We tend to recommend that you include risk and contingencies, if not for each objective. Like, you don't have to have them for every activity under each objective, but if you can stop at each objective and really lay out some of the risks and the ways in which you'll respond, this can work very well. It can also be something summarized, maybe for a more straightforward proposal, a project itself. You could summarize this at the end of the work plan section. But the idea is, here's a challenge we expect. Here's how we will address that. Because if you don't, the reviewers will come back and those will be identified often as weaknesses. So the last slide here, and this is in cases where you're not funded, to what extent do you have to incorporate reviewer feedback? This is critical. We know effective resubmissions, submissions that actively look at what the reviewers were saying, respond in terms of the program design, and resubmit and let the reviewers know where and how these improvements have been made, tend to be effective. And we see the win rates, for instance, go up from 15, 20% to high 20s, 30%. So resubmissions are critical. Incorporating the reviewer feedback is critical. Using annotations to link the revisions to the feedback and make clear why and how you acknowledge their feedback, and then to highlight the changes explicitly in the resubmissions. In the old days, you used to have to do that and highlight, and those days are gone, but it's fine to speak in a formal resubmission, or for NSF, they're always treated as new submissions, but you can still talk about the ways in which a previous panel review really helped you to further tighten the project and to provide more information about why, how you address the why, where, and how issues that the reviewers have. And a final example is here just to give you a sense of the ways in which you can really speak to the reviewers in the project description about the ways in which you've leveraged their expertise to enhance your proposal. That generally goes off very well. And as a reviewer, when we see that kind of work, we know right away that it's a resubmission. We know it's an aggressive faculty member, and the extent to which they've been able to, adjust and respond to that in terms of the project integrity and the proposal quality will be evident. So that's the proposal. I think I'm a couple minutes over, but not much. Or maybe I'm three, no, maybe I'm on time. But some key takeaways, I'll just leave this here with you. Aligning the proposals with the priorities, clearly defining the components, right? The objectives, the innovation, the social relevance, and writing with clarity for this diversity of reviewer panels, really puts you in a good place. I know you are working to review and refine your concept paper with collaborators, colleagues, perhaps even program officers. It's an important next step to engage the program officers early, as we talked about, to confirm both alignment and to get the rapport going and excite the program officer. And hopefully they're enthusiastic and really encourage you to submit, or they provide some good guidance on where there might be a better fit. And then develop that timeline for draft development and iterative reviews and revisions. Of course, that's what we're here to help you with. So that's the presentation. We have some time for Q&A. I'll take a look at the chat, and/or please feel free to unmute and ask any questions.
Hi there. This is Derek Cogburn. I appreciate this. This has been super helpful. I think spot on. I've been involved in this space for quite a while with NSF in particular. I usually serve on about 2 to 3 review panels a year, and so all your advice is spot on. For everybody else, I echo what you said. I know you don't have an answer for this, but given the current funding discussions, are you thinking about ways of, are you encouraging people to just still move forward and try to make proposals, or, does all the same advice hold in this new environment, do you think, or just do you have thoughts? I know it's a disconcerting environment that we're in today.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I know it's top of mind for all of us. Certainly those of us at Hanover, we're slacking and meeting every day, watching all these things come out. I would think that most of my colleagues would say, look, we see a storm, but we know this, we know the process. I think that however the dust settles, that we're still going to see projects. However, this is a pretty seismic change. And I think there is some need to pay attention, as I mentioned in an earlier slide, right? For us to understand the federal context of what's trying to go on. This administration is a bit different than the last. It's always been like that, but this one's kind of racing at a speed that we're not used to. I don't do a lot of reality TV. That's kind of been my thing for several years. I do think that we stay the course. I mean, this is science. These are programs. They're not going to change a lot of what's being done. That being said, the context is going to be different. Some of the language is going to be different. There are lots of ways, for instance, we used to talk about underserved students, we might want to talk about merited students in STEM. There's lots of different things that we have to pay attention to, which kind of goes back to what I was saying early, that we really have to understand what the Fed's priorities are. They're the funder, right? We know that there's a disconnect, at least with some of the population and the current administration, and that is going to play out. But I don't think it's going to impact us in ways that are going to fundamentally transform the way we do proposals. But it's certainly going to be important in the way that we sell the projects to the federal government. And it's going to be important for us, maybe more than ever, to make sure that we're walking a little more lockstep with this administration. That being said, I don't know how long this lasts, the changes and the tumult. I think I'm going to let most of it pass, and hopefully we don't see massive redo of the agencies themselves. What I expect we'll see programs that aren't aligned with the current administration. A lot of them will be, fundamentally changed and or archived, and we'll have to look for the kinds of new things. But, science is science, progress is progress, and I believe that we're all in the right space to continue with that.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know it's a big concern for all of us. So feel free to reach out to Chris and Katie and others on the content director side. We can answer questions on email. When you have specific proposals, right, there's confusion. We're not getting clear guidance yet. So there's lots of ways in which we're prepared, to help you answer your questions, maybe dig a little deeper for you. At the end of the day, and right now they're not very accessible, but the program officers are going to have a lot more information than us consultants, and they are a definitive resource. And their answers are definitive. There's no substitute for that. So when you do have these kinds of questions, the same way you might go to colleagues first to work through things, come to us. We might help you out, but ultimately the program officer is the one I would listen to. That's the definitive source of information. And thanks for your compliment, by the way. I like your background more than mine, and also, yeah, I love reviewing more than anything. I should say, if you haven't reviewed for the federal agencies, certainly sign up. That experience is unparalleled in terms of putting together good proposals. It's also a great way for you guys, unlike me, to really make more connections with the scientific community and others that may drive future collaborations. You can have conversations with collaborators and program officers at the same time, which doesn't happen at that much after, post-pandemic. And so, yeah, connect, review, and those are critical aspects to really understanding the inside track for funding.
Yeah, I would just echo that. So seeing how proposals get discussed and debated and written up and reviewed is invaluable. And then the connections that you make afterwards and during coffee and receptions and so forth during those reviews is great.
Absolutely. And I know we're doing more of them remotely, but so it's not as great as like the personal stuff doesn't happen as often, but it does. And yeah, we're band together, right, to advance some of these core work. Other questions? I know you guys are spending a good part of Wednesday with us. I'm looking at the chat.
We just had a question in the chat about the recording, and yes, it will be shared. So I'll be passing that along to Jennifer. So I would say reach out to Jennifer Mayer to access the slides and recordings.
Yeah, I think we're doing several presentations in sequence, right, Chris, to really help you understand this process, kind of going back to that grant life cycle. We all kind of think in the same mode in that regard.
That's right. Yep, this is the last one of the sequence of three that we've been doing. So Jennifer also has the previous two that we've done.
Well, hopefully this was useful. I didn't want to get into the mechanics of, each component of a proposal, plus all the agencies are very different. But I think I designed this high level guidance to really, give you a sense of the task as you work on these different types of proposals with different elements. The key thing, and I suspect, Derek, you'll agree with me, that project summary is so critical. Getting that done well to help you inform the design of your project, to connect with the program officer, to get them excited and also get good alignment confirmation, or, the bad news, right? A quick no. And then to really make sure that stands out as a compelling sales component of your proposal is critical. I know reviewers, I do it. We can tell by the proposal summary what we're about to look at. So in the sense of triage, it's real. And I've heard that from many other people. I'm borrowing that from someone else.
That's exactly right. So, reviewers that may have, 15, 20 proposals in their queue to review, the sooner, the faster they can get a clear sense of your proposal, exactly like you described it, the better. And so it can help stand out to a reviewer who is going to need to go into the meeting and argue for and support certain proposals that they've reviewed. And if you can help them, give them the ammunition they need to argue for you in a panel review, it's just so helpful. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be critical. I don't, for those of you that haven't been on panels, Derek and I are on a panel, but there's, let's say 30 people total. We get 5, 6 proposals each. And then Derek's told he's a primary on these 3, and I'm told I'm a primary on these 3. So then I read my proposals very carefully, theoretically. And then I go and I do my initial strengths and weaknesses and scores and prepare for conversation. Then if my proposal's picked, I am part of the panel that leads the conversation. If I'm not a lead reviewer on a particular proposal, Derek brings it up, they initiate the discussion. I've probably only read the project summary, or I've skimmed through a couple of visuals. I've looked at something. If I'm a visual learner, I look at the visuals. If I'm a budget person, I look at the budget. And then I come to the conversation. I rely on people like Derek to tell me what's going on. If I haven't read the proposal, I've probably only read the project summary. That's another reason why it's critically important. The skim reviewers and the secondary reviewers are never as prepared as the primaries. So it's really important that that this is why I wanted to stay kind of high level because these aspects of things, and we can get deeper into this in another training or in conversations with you individually, but there are ways in which you want to present information that's easy for the reviewers to see what they're looking for. And this is why we look at the structure and the prominence of the logic of the structure. But also, there's this strategy we call meta narrative, where you highlight a series of 7 to 10, let's say, complete phrases or sentences, right? Nothing, no words, no underlines, not just bold, italicized, maybe 7 to 10 key sentences that basically stand. If you were to lift those out and only read those 7 to 10, that is like the meta narrative of your proposal. And that's another way to deal with the skim reviewers to help people like me, secondary reviewers who are not being fully diligent, to see what I need to see to prepare for the conversation. So it's kind of like taking your project summary and then building it into the main narrative and making sure that those salient features are very accessible to the reviewers, get them to understand what you're doing, the outcomes and the merit, the merit criteria. So sales, there's a lot of salesmanship in here. If you were to, the difference between academic and grant writing, if you boil it down to one word, it would be sales. The grant writing, obviously. So any more questions? We have a few more minutes. I'm free to you right now. And I know that Chris and both Chris and Katie will take all these kinds of questions as part of any of the projects we're working on with you. So feel free to service anything that comes up from any of our presentations, and any of the consultants will address those issues with any review or revision. I do see a couple more chat questions. Let's see. Oh, I have to run. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right. Yeah, I know you guys are on a busy middle of the week. I caught you in the middle of the week, so thanks for your time. I'll leave it to Chris and Katie to finish us off.
Yeah, it looks like we can wrap up since there are no other questions. So just to reiterate, we will be sharing the slides and recording with Jennifer afterwards. So reach out to her if you'd like to access those. But yes, thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. We know it's a busy start to the semester. So thank you and have a good day.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.